Well, hello, my name is Sean Little, and I just want to welcome you to the Yellow Coat Club podcast. I'm going to be just real transparent this morning. um, I feel like I'm just on the struggle bus today. And I don't know how many of you have just experienced that where you're like, man, I just got to keep showing up. And honestly, I was like, should I even be doing this today? And, that's a really good question. And yet I think today's topic, and especially what I want to talk about, kind of goes hand in hand at how I'm feeling or how I'm showing up today. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show up. Like, I've tried to record this episode like 3 different times. And for the first time, I have never had this problem, just like phlegm in my throat and, mush mouth and don't really know what to say. And I'm just like, man, you are scatterbrained. And that's exactly how I feel a lot in life lately. There's been a lot going on, trying to release the book, get all this stuff done. We have our son, still working. Sometimes you bite off more than you can chew. And yet, I feel like a lot of these things are in line with, where I feel like God's calling me in life. And so, sometimes you just got to show up. And so today I'm just going to show up. So if I end up needing to take a drink of coffee or something, like, don't judge me too much. But once again, I'm pretty sure I talked about this before. Like, there's no rules here. So thanks for sticking with me. Today, this episode is going to be dropping on the day that the book, The Yellow Coat Club, is coming out. And so, if you or somebody would resonate with walking through, how to navigate grief, mental health issues, addiction, discovery of, self, and even, just struggling with faith. My hope is that this kind of is an open invitation for you to, or my hope at least, that the words that you would read and the words that I speak, might help you along your journey. And as I've said, and I'll continue to say again and again, like, if, these words, whether written or spoken, help somebody to lead them to their own, hope and healing and navigating that space and becoming who they were created to be, then it'll all be worth it. It'll all be worth it. And it has been so healing in the process to navigate these things. And I mean, even in this moment, being like, I'm just going to show up. Here I am. So anyways, go check out the book. Be really awesome. But today I want to talk about specifically mental health. And so, over the last couple weeks, I think it was October 10th was Mental Health Awareness Day. And so I had, put a post out on social media, and I had a few people that, reached out to me and just asked some questions, and so I felt like that was something that needed to be talked about. And honestly, over the last couple of weeks, in conversations I've had with other people, it seemed to come up a lot. And I don't think that that's coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. I truly believe everything happens for a reason. And so, here we are today. And so we're going to be talking about mental health. One of the things that I do really want to note is that I am not a licensed therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not any of those things. I have seen counselors. I currently see a counselor and who is incredible. I see a psychiatrist currently who is incredible. And I have, seen plenty of people over the years, but I am not one. And so this is not medical advice. This is not anything. This is me speaking from a place of, these are the things that I've gone through. At the AA tables, we learn, we share experience, strength, and hope with others. I'm not going to talk about you. I can't tell you what you're going through, but what I can do is tell you what I've gone through and say, here's what I experienced. Here's, the things that I had to navigate, and here's how I found my way through. But I am not the person that can tell you that. Just like I can't tell somebody that they're an alcoholic. That's a very firm thing. And for anybody that's out there trying to diagnose the people that's around them, like, it's not your job. You can pray for them. You can walk alongside them. You can point them towards, resources or, anything that might be able to help them along their journey. But it's not our place to tell somebody what they are or what they are not. In the sense that, if somebody's really struggling, pray for them, help guide them with resources, talk to people that have gone through that. That's what my hope is here today. And yet I can't tell you what your diagnosis is, but I can talk about mine. And so in order for us to kind of set the stage and where we're at, it'd be relevant to talk about where I came from. And so back in 2018, end of 2018, I was in the thick of it. 2019 was when, everything came to a head in my life. But I had just, gotten to this point where I had verbally said and was outspoken about being an alcoholic. I was actively working with a counselor and a psychiatrist because I knew at some point, there was something that I just felt off, and it's really hard to sometimes mix up timelines, but, I knew that I was struggling with addiction. I knew I was struggling with alcoholism, but I also knew that I was like, why do I experience life in these giant pendulum swings? So I was seeing a counselor, and I remember at that time, I looked at her and I said, hey, I think that this counseling is really helpful. I know that I have to, work through and start managing, the things that I use to self-medicate. And yet something in me tells me that I might have and be living with something, that I don't fully understand. She said, well, are you open to seeing a psychiatrist? And I said, I think that would be great. And so I went and I met with a psychiatrist for the first time in my life. So up until this point, I would see, and if you've ever experienced this, you can walk into a doctor's office, they'll do an assessment on anxiety or depression. And then, your PCP can be like, hey, here's, Lexapro, here's an antidepressant. You scored high on this test, boom, boom, boom. Oh, hey, by the way, we're going to, maybe this one doesn't work for you, so we can try another one. And, it's trial and error. And yes, so much of it is trial and error. But when I sat down with a psychiatrist, it was the first time somebody had actually sat with me and said, hey, I want to know where you came from. Because you're sitting here in my office today in the sofa across from me, but you didn't just one day wake up and we're like, hey, all of this has come to the fan. Like there's patterns and behaviors over time. And so let's dive into those. And so we did this huge assessment. And, when we were young, my mom is, somebody that could light up the room. My mom was this grandiose, just amazing woman. And the dark parts of her doesn't mean that she was any less amazing, but as kids, at least from my experience was, my mom was very unpredictable. Oftentimes you didn't know who you were going to get. And even in moments you didn't know who you were going to get. Sometimes she would respond in love and compassion. And sometimes she would be the person that is just screaming at you. And I didn't know it for a really long time, but that left me anxious, to say the least. As I know it today and can name it, is that it made me feel very unsafe. We like predictable patterns. Children like predictable patterns, and yet I didn't know who I was going to get. My dad was somebody that, for the most part, when my memory of him, he was very steady. You knew who you were getting. My mom was not that case. And so growing up with that in life, you start to see it. But if anybody knows, about mental health issues, a lot of times it can be genetic. It can be passed down. Once again, I'm speaking from my own life. So if there's somebody that has, there's go do your own research and see where that comes up. But my mom was a very proud woman. And so she was not going to be somebody who was going to go get help. And so she never did. And so there's a lot of speculation on, things that may or may not have been going on with my mom, but it is what it is. And so as I sat there and I spoke to this woman and was just telling her about that, and then, as I was growing up, I then, after my mom died, around that same time, I had an eating disorder. We'll talk about that, later down the road of, how eating disorder, came into my life and really, plagued me for many years. And, there was that, there was, alcoholism, other drug use, all of these things that were happening. But meanwhile, in between all of that were these giant erratic swings. And, going from, being happy and joyful all the way to the pendulum swing of like, I'm going to kill myself. And having that swing back and forth, having these crazy, angry outbursts, for things that I can't even remember, but just going, I remember there were times that I was like looking in the mirror, deep breathing, panicking, and just literally asking that question, like, who are you? And it worried me, to say the least. It worried me. But at some point in my life, I like I said, I struggled with an eating disorder. But by the time I had found, when I turned 18, I had really started getting into, using, marijuana and, other, hallucinogens and things like that. But then I found alcohol, but then I found alcohol, and that really started the self-medicating for a really, 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 really long time. And for any of you that have ever experienced, doing that to yourself, like literally self-medicating, it still in itself is very unpredictable. I would be going through and, something very emotional, experiencing that. And then, I would use alcohol to basically like subdue myself. I was uncomfortable in my own skin. And so I thought, hey, if I could drink, or if I could, take this drug, or, if I could, smoke some weed, I could manage what I was going through. When I was a freshman in college, I dated somebody who I look back now and I was just so insensitive, so awful towards, and she experienced a lot of anxiety in her life. And I remember just being so insensitive all the time and being like, you just need to smoke some weed. Oh, it's just all in your head, self-medicate with me. And for anybody that, has anxiety, it could help, or it could be the thing that makes you even more anxious and paranoid than you already are. And so it doesn't help. It's not a one size fits all. And so I think at that time I was unwilling to deal with or even acknowledge, what I was going through. I was constantly fixated on the next high, the next, whether it was, cigarettes and nicotine, being able to calm me down, or, using pills, or, like I said, drinking, any of these things, whatever mix, it was all in an effort to feel a certain way. Always chasing this feeling, I want to feel good. And in my mind was, I have to use these things in order to feel that way. Something else that is really just disheartening and scary at that point too is when you're always chasing those things, and you start to basically live a life where you are just under the influence. You don't know what baseline is. You don't realize. Cup of coffee. 1 second. You don't have, this basis for what is it like for me to even be sober minded, and so I didn't know it. I didn't know it, but I was trapped. And I think the thing that scared me the most was that I couldn't articulate it to anybody. People could see, Sean, the life of the party, or, even when I was down at my lowest, it's not like I spoke about the things I was going through. Like, the more I trace the patterns back, even in, when I was in high school and then even leading into, college and beyond, like I thought about not being here often. And yet it's not something that I shared with people, or, something, bad would happen. And instead of trying to remain positive, I just nosedove into worst case scenario, nosedove into nothing's going to be okay. Nothing's going to be all right. And I remember time and time again thinking, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And in those moments of desperation by myself, I also remember verbally, whether it was looking into a mirror or just sitting there and I'm not okay. I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And it terrified me. And yet it was something that I hid, Who wants to talk to somebody about those really deep-seated things and instead, push people away, The title, the subtitle of the book is Be Courageous, Stop Hiding, Start Becoming, and I hid. I didn't talk to people about that pain. And even hiding behind the substance to subdue that pain. And people use, substances, I say it as in, the actual thing that you consume, but it could be anything, you have workaholic, you have, people that don't want to face life. And so they just pile themselves into work or chasing power, money, accolades, sexual addiction, all of these things. We use things in order to create these temporary fixes when it really takes the hard work of sitting down and saying, how am I going to address this as the whole person? And so I knew, like I said, for a really long time that something was not okay. And yet I refused to get help for a really long time because honestly, I think I was just afraid to admit it to myself. I mean, who wants to be vulnerable and look at people and go, I'm not okay. And so, I've talked about and it'll come up more, but like I had many addictions in my life, but the one that really started to trump everything was alcohol. Alcohol became that thing that, for the longest time, I just thought it was my friend, when we were in college, it was the thing that you did. But it was also something like in our, like, it was fun in the sense that, it's like, oh, I could hang out on a Friday night or we could all go party together. And that's what the word that we used, it incorporated, drinking and everything else, but that's what it was. We're going partying this weekend. We're getting lit. And, so there was that chasing after that. But for me, I was somebody that was, I don't even know how to put it. I feel like when I get comfortable, I could be a pretty boisterous individual, but I was a very insecure person. I was very timid to just be able to go up and introduce myself to people and, but when I was drinking, that was completely different. I had no filter. It removed all of these barriers in my mind and I could just go and just relax and have fun and just in my mind be me. I didn't feel like I had to put on a face for anybody. And instead it was just like, I'm free to go. I'm free to be me. And that's kind of what it became. But all along the way, like I lost myself in it. Because when you start getting to the point when you're waking up every single day and, reaching for a drink to, help get you moving for the day or, I'm going to get all of my stuff done for the day so I can start my drinking. And, life revolved around that. It's not only taxing on your, body, but it's taxing on your mind. It's taxing on your wallet. It becomes the thing in which at least for me, my life revolved around it. And so, fast forward out of college, I'm 25, 26 and, blacking out and, partying every single day and drinking every single day. And so at some point it was like, you look at your life around you and it's like people are starting to go, advance their careers and, get bigger jobs and all of this. And I'm still sitting there going, why am I still, like, it just felt juvenile, and so, that was hard for me because it felt almost like immature to still be living that life. And yet I still lived that life. And so, I was just a roller coaster. And so in 2018, even winter of 2017, I started to experience more and more anxiety. And as I came to learn, drinking, although a lot of times, people, you get you feel worked up or, you're really stressed out or something. And it's like, oh, I'm going to go have a drink. Think about how many times you've heard somebody say that, or you've said it yourself where you're like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go have a drink about it. Or like, ooh, I need a drink. It was a really rough day or something. Well, for me, one drink was always like 5. Just one wasn't a thing. It was kind of like the Pringles can, like once you pop, the fun don't stop. Like one meant 5. I was aiming not to feel. And the hard part about that is it started to almost have the reverse effect where it created a lot of anxiety in me. And so then I would try and manage that anxiety with more and more drinking. Like the worst catch-22. Hey, the thing that is causing you anxiety, you're using more of it to try and reverse the anxiety. And in fact, it's just making it worse. And so I had gone to a PCP. Once again, I had seen a bunch of them, prior to going to college when I was struggling with my eating disorder. And, I told them what was going on. So it's like, hey, here, take this pill. Now I'm mixing, anti-anxiety or antidepressants with alcohol and just a terrible situation. And all the while that hiding, being in denial that I knew I was just making it worse. Like I knew. And, life became more and more unmanageable for me. I talk about it in the book, and I think I'll easily dive more into it when I talk more specifically about alcoholism. But I was dating somebody at the time. It was the first person, that I was dating that I had actually lived with. And so that was a whole nother level of insecurity for me because she could see it. Honestly, I've speculated. I'm like, I don't know how she lasted that long. Because in order to try and hide that life, I'd hide the drinking, or at least thought that I could hide the drinking. But now you're living side by side with somebody and yet never telling them, I can look at you and say, I love you, but I'm not going to tell you what I'm going through. And that, to me, I never let people really know what was going on. And so here I find myself, in a counselor's office, like I said, and I knew it was coming to that point where I could start to say to myself, I'm an alcoholic, but I dare not say that out loud. And over time, and then talking to the counselor and having my own journey, I finally uttered those words and I started to tell people. And yet I knew that was only half the battle. Because like I said, I knew that there was something also that just had felt off for a really long time. And so as I journeyed with this woman and, told her just all of these vulnerable things about my life, she gets to the end and she goes, you're really exhibiting behaviors of living with bipolar. It's usually something that's passed down from a parent or something, and you don't know if your mom carried the diagnosis. You speculate from it, and so with the evidence we have before us, we think that that's what we're working with. How do you feel about that? And on the one hand, you're like, oh, the thing that you hear about in movies, like bipolar, like this really extreme thing, like it was hard to hear. I'm like, oh, I thought you were just going to tell me I was depressed or, something, but we're bipolar. Okay. And yet there was so much relief because at that point, I knew the things that I had felt. Like it now had a name. Like there was a medical way to explain, hey, here's what you might be up against. And also with, life choices and, medication and, just an array of, kind of coming at, the whole person, the whole problem, we can do something about it. And so I remember her also talking about, she's like, think about your mind, your brain's developing till about age 26. And she's like, you report that you were drinking heavily starting at age 19. Like you drank before, but 19 is when it was like, by age 20, I was almost drinking every single day. By 21, I was. And so she just said, like, you've also rerouted your brain pretty hardcore. And so in order for us to start creating those new healthy neural pathways, like you're going to need to stop drinking. She goes, because my thinking behind it, and my best guess is that you are making the swings worse simply by the fact of adding alcohol into the mix. And so I'm gonna stop there because that was really that moment that I could see that there was potentially a path forward, but I knew that there was going to be the hard work of getting sober that was very much tied to it. And so some of the things that I've learned, first off, like, I hope when you hear this story, like I had gotten to a point where I really, really, really was invested in figuring out what was going on with me. And so to answer anybody else's question, the pill wasn't going to save me. Even just drinking, like stopping drinking, wasn't going to be the thing that was going to fully save me. It was an array of things, looking at the whole person and going, how do we develop a lifestyle that contributes to the overall health and satisfaction of life, where you feel at least whole, can experience peace, and do it in a way that isn't destroying yourself. And that was in itself a really, really big challenge, because even from that diagnosis, I started, taking, medication, and I was still seeing a counselor and, doing the work, but I still kept relapsing. And so every time I would go in and talk to her about the relapse, she'd say, hey, we have to start the clock over again. I need you 6 months sober until your brain starts to really create these new neural pathways. And so the medication wasn't going to be the one-all fix-all. I wish I could sit here and tell you, hey, go get this done, take this pill, and you're cured. That's not the case. And then finally, I came to, my end with drinking, September 17, 2019. And that was the last day that, I was actively drinking. And even still, I had to navigate through the space of, addiction, healing, mental health, you name it, all of them together. But it is a lifestyle that you have to choose and create. Anybody that knows me knows that I work out 6 times a week. Whether I'm running or I'm lifting, minimum an hour, but we're talking, 80 minutes a day of exercise. And, people that know me, it's like I eat really healthy, my drug of choice now, I still use caffeine, and, there's been seasons where I'm like, wow, you've gone overboard. You need to minimize that. But between that and then the thing that so many people, I feel like, maybe don't want to address or afraid to address, I was in that camp, is like our spiritual condition. I'm a follower of Christ, and what does he say about me? It literally says as Jesus is addressing people, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives, do I give to you. He talks, about, take my yoke upon yours. My burden is light. And so there is a variety of things that I have to do. There's even a tool that's in the book. I talk through it, and I'm going to get the experts on here one day to talk more in depth about it. But even just this process of being able to look at the stories that we tell ourselves and being able to navigate what's true, what's not true, and being able to rewrite the stories. For the longest time I thought, God didn't love me, I'm not enough, all these things. And yet these stories start to weave together, and they'll lie to us. And so how do we combat those things? And so imagine now you've created this life where you're, medication, not drinking, in the word every single day, lifting or, running, 6 times a week, eating healthy, drinking water, getting enough sleep. I mean, it is creating a lifestyle around yourself going, I want to be the version of me that God created me to be. And it requires me to take my health seriously. Not just my physical health, but my mental health, my physical, my spiritual, like all of these things together. And being vulnerable enough to then also speak about when all we want to do is hide in the dark. And it's not a one and done thing. And even as I sit here speaking to you right now, we just experienced the season change where the mornings are darker and the evenings get darker. And so, I'm in the middle of, or at least that transition where, depression hits really hard, where I don't want to get out of bed, where I don't think I can manage, life, where the weight of the world starts to just press down on you. I have a son, I have a wife, I have a marriage to uphold, I have a job, I have all of these things that, I'm just like trying to manage. And yet I'm sitting there going, I don't feel much right now. And almost in that lack of emotion, I feel sad. I feel stuck. I feel trapped. And even asking that question, what's wrong with me? It's so easy to get caught in going, I'm doing everything right. I'm doing everything that I know how to do. Why am I still stuck in this? But being able to go, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. I recently was digging into. I really like reading the Bible and then getting the context of, the Hebrew or the Greek or the words that are being used. And, there's always this tension being talked about of like darkness and light. And I recently learned that the word used for darkness in the Hebrew is the same word for womb. And so if we think about, I just had my son, in September. He was in his mother's womb for 9 months. And then he comes out, and it's that giving of life. The darkness that gives life. And to me, that's not just one of the most beautiful, poetic things of, thinking that through these dark times, through our trials, that things are being worked out. And asking, what can I learn in this process? How do I continue to go to? And then also asking the question, who am I leaning on? Remember, and Nope, wrong hand. Wrong hand. Got it. Pointing to the Yellow Coat Club. Whether it's, here, or, a brotherhood or a sisterhood, or a friend or somebody, like, we were meant to do life together. And I would be foolish not to reach out to other people, or even walk down the hall and look at my wife and go, I'm not okay. I don't feel okay. That's okay. And we need to live in a world and create space for people to feel that. And also in those parts, be able to walk alongside them. St. John of the Cross talks about the dark night of the soul. And while I know that usually applies to, going through like a really heavy season, for me, it's minimum twice a year where I can feel that swing so heavy in my life. And as I sit here even right now, today was even asking, I'm like, can I even do this? And I was like, yeah, you can. Just go sit down. Just go show up. Be real. Because if you only let people see the painted parts, when you only let them see the good parts, then, we become that fakeness that, is so easily rampant in the world around us. It's like we show our pretty parts on, our Instagram stories and our Facebook or whatnot. And it's like, but the journey to get there, we need more people talking about what it took to get there. Because I think that those are the things that people can relate to. We see all of the things that we want to be and aspire to be. But it's the story that gets there, the one that we live through, that changes us the most. And so my encouragement to you today is that if you know somebody who is struggling, that you're not there to fix them, but you can't hold space. You're not there to diagnose them, but you can listen. You can be a friend. You can be an ally. And for somebody who is going through this, know you're not alone. And I will tell you right now that whatever you're going through will try and lie to you and tell you that you're alone, you're isolated, no one will understand. It's better to hide. You're weak if you're experiencing what you are. You need to tell those things to go to hell. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. Those stories need to be captured, looked at, examined, and you tell them you have no place here. Because as long as we stay in hiding, the life that follows, it won't come. Remember, the darkness, the womb, the child emerges. It produces life. So allow what you're going through to produce life. Turn to somebody. Talk about it. Be vulnerable. And if people in your life can't handle the things that you're telling them, if you're sitting there going, oh man, this person's going to judge me, I'm letting you know right now, if the person that you tell about the things that you are experiencing and going through is going to judge you, then I'm not sure that you want that person speaking into your life anyways. You are who you are. You're not wrong for how you feel. And my encouragement to you is that just talk to somebody. Be courageous. Step out of hiding. Start having those conversations and become the person that you were created to be. And it's not perfect. I know that for certain. It's not perfect. but it's you. These things don't have to define you. This isn't the end of your road. We just keep showing up. We do the best that we can, one step forward, and we become committed to living a life where we're done with the hiding. We're done with it. So, as I wrap up here, if you have other questions, like I said, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, but there is room, for you to be able to submit questions on the website, or if you go to social media, it's the Yellow Coat Club. I'll be on the other end. I might not have the answer that you're looking for, but I can tell you what the things that I did to navigate through some of this space. And like I said, this isn't the last time I tell this story, but you got to start somewhere. And so my prayer for you today, or whomever that's struggling, is that you or they, that we just start today. We're showing up. All right. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that this has been maybe helpful, or regardless, this was helpful for me. So thanks for listening. Thanks for hearing my heart. And I just appreciate all of the people that have continued to walk beside me and in supporting, what it is that God is doing here, and being able to use me in any way that he can. So I thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being a part of this. And, until next time, we'll talk soon. Also, shameless plug one last time, go check out the book. Really excited about it. And, I had to struggle a lot in my mind in these last days of like, oh, it's not ready. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. And I will end with this. This is not the last story that I will ever tell. There are many stories to be told, and there's other people that need to tell their story too. And I will be here as long as those stories need to be told. All right. Thanks, guys. And until next time, talk soon.